So what this theory seeks to answer is we all have different moral sentiments, right? We all have different moral preferences. Well, where do these moral preferences come from, right? And then, so this theory says that all of our moral sentiments, our moral intuitions, they probably come from evolutionary features, right? And then mainly, there are 6 that are very easily explained, right? So the first one is care, right? Liberty, fairness. Let's see, fairness. And there's also loyalty, authority, and sanctity. This is reframe. Should push back a bit. So, these are like the different intuitions that we might have about morality, right? And every moral argument, basically, it caters to one of these or multiple of these moral, I guess, like intuition sentiments, right? So where does this sentiment for fairness come from? Where does this evolutionary sentiment for fairness come from? Well, it comes from comes from cheating, right? When someone cheats you, then they get all the benefit in like a two-way relationship, right? So for example, if you're partnering with them and then they cheat, they claim all the benefits of that two-way relationship, right? And that's why we have an adverse feeling towards cheating, and that's why we want fairness, right? Meanwhile, care develops from the love for our children, right? It's about for example, our child. It's like they're weak, right? They're vulnerable, and we want to protect them, right? And then that sort of generalizes into all the weak people who can't defend themselves, I guess. And then liberty is adverse because we don't want oppression, right? Let me write the opposite for each, right? Cheating. These are the triggers that make us that trigger these moral sentiments, right? Cheating, care, I don't know, like children, weakness, right? And then liberty is like oppression, right? We don't want to be oppressed. Loyalty is the idea that we need to get what we deserve, right? If we did something, we deserve to be recognized for it, and it's triggered by betrayal, right? You can probably imagine how this goes in a prehistoric world, right? Someone betrays you, you get really mad. Right? Authority, the interesting one. It's like, it's your relationship with the hierarchy, right? You want a beneficial relationship with the hierarchy, because what does it usually provide? It provides order, it provides stability, right? And when people disobey the hierarchy, it turns into, society might devolve into chaos, there might be rebellions, and so that's why obedience and authority is also a moral sentiment for many people, right? So it would be like, the trigger would be like disobedience. And lastly, sanctity. This is also an interesting one, because it might, for some people, they might use this to justify, like, I mean, not justify, they might use this to argue for like racism or something, like, oh, this is the Aryan race, right? But where this kind of sentiment comes from is the fear of diseases and contamination, right? Because it's like you see a dead body, and it's like, oh, that body might be infected, or that type of, like those people, they might be infected with some disease. And that's why you become, you have this adverse feeling towards things that are considered impure, right? So it comes from disease. Now, different people, everybody has some degree of like everyone cares about all of these, right? But to different degrees. And what's important is figuring out what each group cares about, right? And so a very good example is this kind of conservative and progressive divide, right? So for example, a progressive person in the United States might value, fairness, like pretty high, right? Care, probably very high. Liberty, very high, right? But then loyalty it's like, yeah, it's all right. And then authority, probably not very high, right? And then sanctity, also probably not very high. Meanwhile, a conservative person in the United States might value authority pretty high, loyalty, probably the highest, right? Sanctity maybe up there, right? And then liberty, probably high as well. And then care and fairness, like, probably not as much, right? And so we get these different, it's like we end up with different groups valuing different things, right? And so what does this teach us? It teaches us that when we're trying to convince a group of people, we need to figure out what are their moral preferences? What are their preferences for their sentiments, right? And so, for example, if I was a Democratic candidate arguing for, the protection of environments, right? If I was talking to a Democratic not Democratic, if I was talking to like a progressive audience, I'd be like, oh, because look at all these people who are affected by climate change who can't protect themselves because it's like a global thing and that's why we have to fix it. And then I'm, kind of catering to this principle of care, right? The sentiment of care. But if I was talking to, like, let's say a Republican audience, I might say, well, we need to protect this place because there's something sacred about it, right? Like this is like this one Obama speech, right? This is one Obama speech, and he's like, oh, this is sacred land our ancestors fought and died here, and then that's why we need to protect this land. And that's catering to sanctity, right? And so we can reframe these moral ideas to appeal to the groups that we're targeting, right? And so we shouldn't, because every idea can be reframed around these sort of different moral principles, right? Yes?
I like the conservatives saying that everything harms the children, and like that ups.
Yeah. Like Nigel Farage, this just told me, like Nigel Farage, when they talk about anti-immigration, they talk about care, right? They're like, oh, but would you rather have immigrants or would you rather have your daughter hurt or whatever, right? And then they're talking about care, right? Meanwhile, like let's say if we have a Republican president, right, like a right-wing president, there's an example of this, Ronald Reagan. He argues for immigration, right? And he's like, well, America is such a great country, and we're the only country who can afford to have these. It's our duty as the greatest country in the world to take up all the talents in the world and all the suffering in the world. And then that's sort of it appeals to the Republican audience, right? Because it appeals to authority and that kind of stuff, right? Another really famous example is when Bernie Sanders, he's arguing for, gay people in the military. There's someone arguing that, oh no, gay people shouldn't be in the military. And he's like, well, but you're talking about, tens of thousands of people who have served and died for our country, right? Are we just gonna betray them, right? And then now he's appealing to, loyalty, right? And then so it's about reframing arguments, not just to appeal to the groups that you like, but also to the groups that don't like this idea, right? And that's how you convince people. It's about framing moral arguments around these things, right? And so that's what moral foundations theory is about. It teaches us where our moral sentiments come from, and it teaches us how to use ethos to attack more specifically, right? How to use ethos correctly. It's very, very, very useful in political philosophy. So yeah, was that helpful? Thank you.